Yes, yes, yes.
Fine. I am Ulla, and I'm going to present you briefly on your speech. You're going to talk about the mobilization for abortion rights in Ireland. Yeah. And you are the founding head of women's studies at University College Dublin, and you have been campaigning for LGBTIQ and social issues for decades. And you have played a key role in Victoria's marriage equality referendum in Ireland. And you also was a leader of the campaign for abortion rights in Ireland. You are currently chair of Women's Aid Ireland and is also campaigning against the growing strength of far-right extremism. So, and you also, I read here that you were listed as one of Time magazine's most influential people. So please, I leave the word to you.
Thank you very much, Ulla. I hope everybody can hear me. Can I just check with Nancy or somebody there? How long do I have? Because I was told 15 minutes and then some time for conversation. So are we still on that?
Yes. I'm Nancy.
Okay.
I'm Nancy. So yes, you have
great.
We are just late.
Okay.
But 30 minutes and then.
But I'll go as quickly as I can anyway. I mean, it was just to know, did I need to make it even shorter? Because I am going to race through things and I think I'm going to have to speak even faster. But first of all, it is lovely to be here with you all. Wish I could be there in person, because this is obviously an incredibly important topic for us all over Europe, North America, South America. Not just abortion, but the whole attack on women and on LGBTIQ people, among others, from an increasingly intensifying far right. So what I'm going to do today is, first of all, thank Maria Teresa for a really interesting presentation, and to say there are so many points of contact between the Argentinian experience of campaigning and the Irish one. And I've been on several panels with co-campaigners from the Argentina, and I'm constantly struck by the similarities. And it was lovely to listen to Maria Teresa here today, and also to realize that we both started off our lives as academics one way or another. But I've been a campaigner really since the late 1970s as part of the women's movement and later the LGBTQ movement. And as I speak today, I'm very conscious that I'm speaking about the abortion referendum campaign in Ireland in 2018, but we had previously had a referendum for same-sex marriage, for the right to marry for lesbian and gay people in 2015, and I was very involved with that campaign. So I'm not going to talk directly about that today, but it did serve to kind of open up the ground for us to hold our campaign. So I'm going to share my screen, and I'm hoping it's going to work. Oh gosh, I'm not sure that it is. That's supposed, yeah, okay. So if you just bear with me for a moment, I always get very mixed up here. Slideshow from the beginning. Okay, so I really am going to speak very quickly about how we ran the campaign and say a quick word then about the issues that we face at the moment, not least from the onslaught of the far right. So the issue that we were facing was that abortion had been profoundly, absolutely banned since 1861, which was a British act while we were still colonized. And it remained absolutely prohibited by law until 1983, when we were obliged by government to hold a referendum to double prohibit abortion by putting a clause into our constitution, which banned it constitutionally as well as in the courts. And that amendment actually said that that the Constitution recognized the right to life of the unborn and the equal right to life of the mother. And you notice the language there, that word unborn, which was not a word, not a noun in English, and not the life of the woman or the person pregnant, but specifically the mother. Very conservative language. But we had, of course, been fighting for women's right to choose since the 1970s. I remember we were fighting first for contraception, which we didn't get until much later. And then we were fighting for abortion. But between 1983 and 2018, when we finally got the right to abortion, we had several abortion referendums. 83, where it was constitutionally banned. Just 10 years later, we were asked if we wanted to remove the threat of suicide as grounds for legal abortion, because abortion was permitted in Ireland if a woman's life was threatened. And, you know, that was a really stupid question, because the threat of suicide is a threat to a woman's life. We were asked to vote on whether or not women should have the right to travel abroad for abortions, and also if we should have the right to information about abortion. And I'm just reminding you that Ireland was at that time, and for a very long time, a democracy. So it was absolutely humiliating and mortifying and insulting to have to vote on whether or not women should be part of that democratic process. And we had, oh, I keep doing the wrong one, I'm so sorry. It's typical. We had a bird, oh gosh, there's something actually wrong with my screen at the moment, it keeps rushing ahead. We eventually, we had another referendum in 2002. Did we want to remove suicide? We said no, we did not want to remove the threat of suicide. And finally, in 2018, the 8th Amendment was repealed and abortion became, finally was able to become law. But that meant between 1983 and 2018 that we 35 years of campaigning, and you can imagine the terrible stress there was for women, 12 women traveling every day to Britain and elsewhere for an abortion. We had, you know, made submissions, and there were condemnations for international bodies. We had numerous court cases, and there were very tragic cases of women being seriously damaged in their health by the denial of abortion, and also there was a case of death, and there you have just an image of women, a performance piece around women traveling to Britain for abortions. But in 2012, a young Indian woman who had come to live and work in Ireland went to hospital, where she was deemed, when she was in about the 13th or 14th week of her pregnancy, she wasn't well. They deemed that she was miscarrying. She and her husband requested an abortion, and she was told no, that she couldn't have an abortion even though she was miscarrying, because a fetal heartbeat was still detected. And these fetal heartbeat laws in the USA are now very widespread, as you know. But the tragedy was that Savita Halappanavar, that was her name, she died as a result of having been refused an abortion in an Irish hospital. And that created absolute outrage. And on foot of that, a couple of us got together and said, you know, we have the abortion rights campaign already. We have new Action for Choice. We have the Irish Council for Civil. We have all of these groups who are more or less supporting abortion explicitly or implicitly. What we need to do is build a huge coalition to actually demand that we hold a referendum asking us, do we want women and pregnant people in Ireland to have the right to abortion, yes or no? We had never been asked that question since 1983. So we wanted to have that referendum to respect and protect women's lives, health and choices. And we wanted to build this grassroots movement. So the coalition started off very small with about 12 organizations. And by the time we actually came to the moment when we were leading a referendum campaign nearly 5 years later, we had something 100+ organizations. I'm aware that in Argentina there were 500+, but Ireland is a much smaller country. So you can see there that we were very clear about what we were doing, that we knew we had to be clear. We knew we needed unity. We knew it had to be grassroots. We knew that we had to work on putting this onto the political agenda and to push our nervous, cowardly politicians to do something. We knew that we needed to get the messaging right, how we spoke to the public. And we were very, very clear that we wanted to have a feminist, women-led, women-driven campaign. And indeed, that is very much what we did. So these are just some of the kinds of things that that we had to do. For example, Give 8, Repeal 8, we had to raise money. We had to get out on the streets and march. The photograph up on the left is outside our parliament. We held public meetings. We organized all around the country. And of course, eventually, as organizations did come together, did work in unity, put pressure on government after much debate and discussion, including a citizens' assembly, which voted absolutely in favor of having a referendum, and a referendum which hopefully would say yes and give women the right to abortion. The government called that referendum in 2018, and the coalition to repeal the 8th Amendment, the National Women's Council, which was a big organization of 180 women's groups and organizations, and the Abortion Rights Campaign, which had groups all around the country, we all came together. We'd all been working together in the coalition, but we came together to form the Together for Yes referendum campaign. And these are just the logos of some of the two major organizations. That was the day of our launch. And we, at that stage, had a logo. We were very keen and very clear that we needed to have an identity. It was so brilliant in Argentina, just the green, all those acres of green that you would see in all of the marches. And oddly enough, green was our key color as well, although we didn't know that at the time that we were sharing this color with Argentina. And that's just a group of people out there campaigning on the streets, which was so important. But I want to just focus on one or two things since time is short. I'm going to race ahead and to say that from the beginning, we knew that the way in which we would speak to people, I'm thinking back to 2013, 2014, long-term planning was important, that in a referendum campaign, you don't actually shout at people. What you need to do is encourage them to have a conversation, and that we would need to have very clear messages to stand up against the opposition to abortion from the Catholic Church, which was no longer very strong in Ireland, but still there, and from the very, very strong anti-abortion groups who really had their roots in Catholicism. So we did a lot of research between 2014 basically and 2018 and on what people's fears were. And I think that this was very grounding for the campaign. We were very aware what people around the country actually thought about abortion and what their fears, their anxieties, their reservations were. And we knew that we were talking about a middle ground because about 20% of the population, according to polls, were viscerally opposed to abortion. And another larger group, about 30%, were pretty well in favor, but you did still have 50% in the middle who could go either way. So we knew that we had to keep our messages very simple. It's a healthcare need. Women need care. If you care about women, you will vote in favor of ensuring that women can get the care they need to ensure their reproductive rights and their reproductive health. We had to be compassionate, and that was a very, very, very strong plea that we made. And we had to face the fact that Ireland had changed and needed to change further. We had voted in favor of same-sex marriage, Ireland and a younger generation clearly had very different views. And finally, very important, this matters to women immediately and in a very urgent way, but actually a country which enables women to exercise reproductive freedom, that's important for everybody, not only women. So I think that what we were doing, and I think it's maybe one of the most important things that we did in the debate, in the referendum campaign to push back against the opposition, was to very significantly change the terms of the debate. We were not talking about morality. It was not about whether or not abortion is good or bad, good or evil, whether it's a sin or not a sin. What we were saying is it's not about morality, it's about a need, it's a necessity, and it is a health need that women had. We are not talking about the rights of a fetus. We are talking about real life women who have real life needs. And those women are your sisters, your wives, your partners, your daughters, your cousins, your friends, your community. That we don't need theological, medical, scientific experts. What we need are the stories, the experiences, the testimonies of women. And in fact, we found that women were believed, whereas the media, for example, were not, the theologians were not, the church were not. Really, who the people ultimately believed were the medics, actually, and women. And that this was no time, we were past the stage of making moral judgments, that this was a time when, as a country, we needed to show understanding and compassion, and to understand that no woman is born as a girl saying, I want to have an abortion. It is something which she comes about in her life, and she needs it, and she should be able to have it, no questions asked. So we also wanted to make it clear that we weren't asking for anything extraordinary, because abortion is ordinary, it's everyday, it's part of healthcare, it's part of our lives as women and people who can become pregnant. So we did this lovely thing of just simply gathering women together in a street and saying, you know, she's somebody you know, she's somebody who lives on your street. But we were very conscious that we were dealing with an electorate of voters who were nervous about abortion. So the opposition made huge mistake at the beginning. Their posters were out there with big pictures of a fetus inside a woman's belly, which actually, and saying abortion is murder, and saying how many murders are committed every year by women from Ireland by going to Britain to have abortions. Very in your face, very confrontational, very extreme, and very brutal. And people did not like those posters. Families were saying, how am I to explain to my 5-year-old who asks me outside the supermarket, is that a photograph of, is that a picture of a baby? So those very confrontational posters people found them upsetting. We noticed that. Our initial posters were extremely withdrawn, drawn right back. It didn't even mention abortion. Sometimes a private matter needs public support, vote yes. And it wasn't until the end of the campaign that we were a little bit more explicit. A woman you love might need your yes, which was a direct address to men to say, this is about you, you have to get out there and vote, because men tended to say, this is not about us, we won't say anything, it's not our place. We also were very clear about who were the people that we needed to persuade and who could do the work. So as I said before, it was very much women, doctors, and local people, people in their own communities. So that sense, as in Argentina, of a national campaign was really important. All our messaging was based on clear evidence, but it was the human stories, women bearing testimony to their experiences over and over and over on and through social media, which was a really important tool. I could do a 2-hour talk on the importance of social media, but of course I won't. The other important factor in the job of persuasion was to keep it moderate. No lectures. You didn't go out there saying, you have to do this and you have to do that. It was very much about, I am voting yes for repeal of the 8th Amendment so that women can make their own decisions and choices. What do you think about it? Let's talk about this, keeping it conversational, which was a tactic which had worked very well in the marriage equality campaign 3 years earlier. And it did work very well, because those of us who were pro-choice and still are pro-choice and pro-abortion were really seen as the devil's advocates with horns on our heads. So it had to be very, very, very careful. And by the end of the campaign, if I said women have to be able to make their own decisions, people would say to me, you mean you're pro-choice? And they would say, and so am I now. So it was very encouraging. We won by an absolute landslide, in a massive turnout of just over 2 million, which in Ireland is really very big. And those are just some of the incredibly happy faces on the day it was that the victory was announced. I mean, it was a very, very moving day, because it was seen as a historic moment and a real turnaround, that Ireland had left its Catholic, ultra-Catholic, hyper-Catholic, unjust, uncompassionate, judgmental past behind. It was seen as a real turning point and a real milestone. So we won because of what I've been saying to you just now, I think. The timing was so right after that very tragic death. People's hearts were opened up. And it is so important to remember, people vote with their emotions as much, if not more, than with their heads. So I won't go through all of those. I've mentioned them there. Let me say that we had an absolutely brilliant ground campaign all around the country, thousands and thousands of people turning out. And those are just Orla and Gráinne and myself, who were the campaign leaders. And that was the day after the vote. We were very happy. But we were very clear from that day on. We knew that we had won a battle, but there is still a war to be fought around abortion and reproductive rights. And in fact, that is very true. I'm going to flick on to the next slide. A third of the people voted no in 2018, approximately. They're still there. There have been protests outside clinics and surgeries, opposition to legislation that we need to have come in to provide safe access to clinics for women so they won't be harassed by protesters. Far-right attacks have been intensifying on social media. Our government shows very little appetite for liberalising the law. Our elected representatives, as I've mentioned before, are not brave when it comes to the issue of abortion. Services are still unavailable, are very limited in many, many, many hospitals. And about 200 women travelled to the UK for abortion in 2020, which is the latest year for which we had figures. And this is because abortion is available on request, on demand, up to 12 weeks, through your general practitioner doctor for the first 9 weeks, then in hospital. But after 12 weeks, it's available only if there is a serious risk to the woman's health and in the case of a fetal anomaly. And of course, many women are very concerned if they have a fetal anomaly, and they do tend to travel to Britain for abortion in those cases, as do women who are over the 12-week limit. So as soon as we came out of the referendum in 2018, we set up an abortion working group, which is composed of many of the organisations who fought the campaign. And we meet on a monthly basis to monitor and research and really to look at how the implementation of the law is going. Where is service provision at? What is the reality of access? Is it more difficult for migrant women? Yes, it is. What about women with disabilities? What about trans men who can become pregnant? Looking at all of the ways in which women can find access very difficult unless their needs are recognised. So there is now a governmental review of the legislation in process, which was part of the law that was enacted in 2019. So we are making submissions to abolish gestational limits, to put in place safe access zones, and to end refusal of care clauses. Refusal of care clause is also known as a freedom of conscience. We reject that because we believe that women who choose to have abortions also do so in good faith and in good conscience. So we are working very, very hard at the present time to try to push the law further. I'm not sure that we're going to succeed this time, but we keep up the battle, and we are so aware of how women elsewhere throughout the world are having to fight those battles. So we actually, keep working with our sisters and brothers in Poland, for example, in the USA, throughout the world. I do think what gets us through all of this, what keeps us going, is the passion, the determination, and that unity is crucial in all our struggles. Thank you very much. Can I get rid of this now? Don't know how to get rid of my, oh, here we are. Sorry. So I'm not getting a full screen there. Anyway, I hope that was okay.
Oh, very good, very good. Thank you.
So can you see me? You see me okay?
No, very, very good. And I don't know if someone has a question.
I went over my time a little bit. Sorry, Nancy.
No, no problem. I don't know if we have some questions in the chat. Thank you so much for unpacking all the long-term work you did and change. My question is relating to the resistance during that process. What kind of resistance did you encounter, and how did you re-strategize, or how did that sort of go about it?
So basically about the resistance, well, I didn't deal with that in the presentation because something had to go, but it's also indicative of a rather important strategic decision that we made quite near the beginning of the campaign, which was that we were not going to focus on a back and forth argument between the anti-abortionists and those of us who are pro-abortion, pro-choice, because that locked us into a battle that you really couldn't get out of, number one. And number two, that the 20% of the electorate that was really deeply opposed to abortion, we were not going to convince them. We were not going to address our arguments to them. And in fact, we weren't even really addressing our arguments to the 25–30% who were absolutely in favor. We went for those who weren't sure. So that was a specific strategy and a specific tactic because we were running a referendum campaign. If we had been doing some other kind of campaign, maybe more broadly in Parliament, we probably would have adopted a different strategy. Now, we did nonetheless develop, of course, very strong arguments to counter the arguments of the right and the far right, the extreme right, and specifically of the anti-abortionists, which was all of the far right, really. We did, of course, do that. And they were important. There were important television debates during the course of the campaign. And those arguments were very important in those debates because you would have two anti-abortionists and two pro-choice people set up against one another, which really didn't reflect opinion in the country, but that was the way the debates were set up. So it was important, but not on an everyday basis. And I think it was an interesting decision. We did not spend time on them. We spent time on trying to convince ordinary, everyday people who didn't quite know which way to go. Does that answer the question okay? I see you nodding. Okay, good, good.
Yeah.
Oh, I do wish I was there in person with you. It'd be so much nicer and easier.
Yes, to the next backlash. Thank you, Maria Teresa and Ailbhe, and all who have joined in this session for abortion rights. And now we're going to the next one.
And if you want to follow us, please join to the next.
Thank you.
And we have maybe 5 minutes. So thank you.
Thank you. Such a pleasure.